Your father wasn't a college-educated man. He wasn't a lawyer or a doctor, but when I married him, I found my life mate. I found someone who I had a family with, and that filled my life with joy. So the choice of our significant other, our spouse, our life partner. But there's a third thing that I would submit is even more important, that no one ever told me about. I never read about it in any books. I had to write a book about it. I called it Who's Your City? The third thing that we found with Gallup, which is the key differentiator, is the place we choose to live. The place we choose to live, not the place by default we fall into living, the place we consciously choose to live is the third leg of the triangle and the most critical of all. Because the place we choose to live, from that flows all our other choices. It structures our choice in the labor and job market. It structures our choice of professional and career networks. It structures our choice of friends and potential mates. And that choice of place emerges centermost on the minds of the creative class. The choice of place to a place that's exciting and vibrant, that has energy, that can attract people not only from inside, but from outside. That is a place that's exciting to locals and tourists alike. And that's how I get to the fundamentals of place. You see, we actually dug in and looked at, in hundreds of thousands of people, what are the key factors that make us emotionally attached to community. And here, I think, are the greatest breakthroughs we've made of all, and elements that I hope can shed light on your strategy for tourism, for cultural heritage, for arts and culture, but I would submit are the fundamental parts of your economic strategy. You see, those silos don't matter anymore. What's good for tourism, what's good for cultural heritage, what's good for arts and culture is exactly what's good for economic development. And I have to say this, and I have to underline it, I have to put exclamation points. I don't come at this from a person with a background in tourism. I don't come at this from a background in arts and culture. I don't come at this from a background in multiculturalism. I come at this from someone who spent his life trying to understand what makes economies grow. These are not afterthoughts. These are not added-ons. These are not chicken and egg dilemmas. These are the stuff, the motor forces of economic growth alongside technology excellence and investment in human capital and talent. So we looked at what matters to people. We called it the pyramid of place. And I hope this resonates. The bottom of the pyramid, you in this country have succeeded on, perhaps because of external threats, more than any other country. And it's something my own country, the United States, my home country, can learn. The bottom of the pyramid has to be personal security. Remember what Abraham Maslow said. If you feel insecure in your personal life, if you feel threatened in your personal life, you can develop no further. So creating a basis for personal security, limiting crime and safety, and look at the accomplishments on crime and safety and limiting violent crime in this country. Look at what Michael Bloomberg has accomplished in New York, that taking that murder rate down. So crime and safety, but many people would say, well, that's sort of where the job ends. Well, the second level in the pyramid, economic opportunity. Many would argue that crime and safety and making a secure environment and making sure our people have jobs, if we do those two things, we've hit a home run. We're batting 1,000. We've made it. If we can provide a safe and secure environment and good, productive economic jobs, over. Well, in our Gallup survey, we found that those were the two bottommost layers of the pyramid. Essential, but not all the way down the road. We found that there's 3 other things that a community has to do to really become a place that their residents feel emotionally attached to. And the emotional attachment is critical. Because once a resident feels emotionally attached to a community, they have a multiplier effect. It's like an economic multiplier. When you attract an industry, that industry attracts a multiplier effect of other related industries. When you attract people, people attract a multiplier effect of other people. The middle part of the pyramid as we go up, as Abraham Maslow says, as we develop as a species, as we overcome our environment, as we move from a struggling against nature to having a little bit more affluence, to becoming more transcendental, where we can focus on human emotion and love and building, having leadership that is visionary. Having leadership that points the way to a future that's better, that points the way to a future that's inclusive, that allows citizens to become part of a positive change. I remember meeting with Mayor Daley. We talked about this yesterday, the mayor and I, and how we make these transformations inclusive. Because so much of what we're dealing with in Jerusalem, in Israel, around the world, so much of the creative economy is so threatening. I saw this happen in my adopted hometown of Toronto, one of the most progressive communities on the planet, where people felt left behind. Working people felt left out. And they elected a very conservative, in fact, we're finding now a corrupt and devious mayor. But it was because they were anxious about the future and they didn't see how they could fit in. What Mayor Richard Daley said, every person has to feel that they are a part of that future. Every person has to feel that they too can be part of this. And every human being is creative. Creating a context in which every human being, whether they work on a farm or in industry, in technology, can feel a part for themselves and their kids. But then there's the two highest parts of the pyramid. And these folks were frankly shocking to me when the results came in from this survey of hundreds of thousands of people. A community that's open to all, where every single individual feels they can have a go, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of whether they're able-bodied or physically or mentally disabled, regardless of all of that. You know, creativity is the great leveler. It defies the social categories we have imposed on ourselves of race and ethnicity and sexual orientation. I don't need to tell you about this. But what we found is that communities where everyone felt they could fit, where everyone felt they could be part of the mix, the overall attachment of the whole, not each group, the overall attachment of the whole group. Which brings me to the top of the pyramid. And you can go to the Gallup Knight Foundation Soul of the Community page on the web, if you don't believe me. It's there in print for you to see. What is the true soul of the community? It's the quality of place. It's these assets of culture and authenticity. It's the, let me use a rarefied word, the aesthetic character of your community. All the things that you've invested in here to beautify the community. These are not things you do at the margin. This is the number one factor of all in the attachment of residents and the excitement of others in your community. The aesthetic character, the quality of place, and what of those things really matter? The natural environment. Investing in what some call sustainability. When I see the magnificent new parks in the green space here, when I see the night light showing the walls and the green space, that ability to provide in a hurly-burly, dense city, an old city, crowded city, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, New York, London. As people require density to be productive, as talent requires access to other talent, as we live close together, not spread out further, having public green space, what Mike Bloomberg has done to create more green space and waterways, to beautify New York, is critically important. What you've done here in Jerusalem to create new green spaces, to harness that natural environment, investments in arts and culture. The Gallup survey calls them our social and cultural offerings at all sizes and scales. We were just talking, the mayor and I, about the Sacred Music Festival. What an amazing achievement. All sorts of music, from ancient music and sacred music to new music, the beats and rhythms that pulsate, the sound of our cities, the artistic engagement, and not only the high arts. You know, in my book, I turn a phrase, and I don't mean to be critical, because I'm a supporter of the high arts. My wife, Rana, who's with me, is on the board of the Toronto Symphony. I was on the board of the Ontario Art Gallery. We care deeply about this, but sometimes I call them the SOBs. Sorry, the symphonies, the operas, and the ballets. They can seem a little snooty. Street-level participative culture, where young people and old people and ethnically different people can attach to their culture. What we found among creative people is they not only want to consume culture, we want to be part of the production and participation in culture. And then our true gold, our true resource, history. How blessed you are. How many other cities around the world would die for this asset? How many other new cities? You know, we're going to put 3.5 billion people around the world in cities. We currently have 3.5 billion people in cities now. We're going to put another 3.5 billion in cities over the next 50 years. We're building cities all throughout the Middle East, all throughout Asia, all throughout Latin America, Africa, from nothing. They all look the same. They have the same buildings. They have the same shops. They have the same houses. They don't know how, they don't know. They can't create something that history, you know, my mentor, Jane Jacobs, the great urbanist, said something that I hope you understand here in Jerusalem. She said, new ideas don't come from suburban office parks. New ideas don't come from corporate campuses. She said, new ideas require old buildings. Just think about that. New ideas require old buildings. Old buildings in mature communities with density, with interaction, with street life that people can make and remake themselves. Well, she was talking about industrial loft buildings, 100 years old or so in New York. Not the kind of history you have here. That authentic, true asset that speaks to every person in the world. Well, I'm a professor, which means I come from the Fidel Castro School of Public Speaking, which means, trust me, I could keep you here all day. I want to end on a story, and it's not a story from Israel. It's a story from my country, the United States, that I hope will help you understand truly why creativity is important, why creativity is the crucial economic resource we have, and how we can never tell not only where it's going to come from, but how we can inspire it in individuals. Well, it must have been 15 or nearly 20 years ago that I found myself in Seattle, Washington, a lovely place on the Pacific coast of the United States in the Northwest. And I was meeting with the then mayor and their council and their leadership, and we were talking then in the 1990s about what Seattle could do to become a technology community. This is before Amazon.com was successful. Of course, Microsoft was a productive enterprise at the time. Before Seattle had given rise to so many of the other enterprises, including Starbucks, that have shaped much of the world. And we were touring, much as we toured Jerusalem yesterday, we were touring downtown Seattle, which now it's a metropolis, but at the time was burnt out, terrible problem with homelessness, a lot of abandoned buildings, storefronts boarded. And we passed by cafes, which must have been the earliest incarnation of what became Starbucks, and we saw a bookstore and an art gallery. And off in the distance, as we see such remarkable construction here, off in the distance I saw this new building being constructed that looked very different to me at the time. It was a very curvilinear building, and as I inquired, it was being built by Frank Gehry. Frank Gehry was not as known as a starchitect as he is today. He was an established architect, but this was, to me, quite striking. And it was just a scaffolding of this very curvilinear building. Well, I asked the city leaders, I said, what is this remarkable structure? And I was proceeding to try to guess. And they said, well, this is what one of our city's high-tech industrialists, this was him giving back. It was him giving back to Seattle. And they said, it's not Bill Gates, and I, of course, knew the name Bill Gates. It was Bill Gates' co-founder at Microsoft, Paul Allen, who at the time was the second richest man in the world. And they said, this is what Mr. Allen, Paul Allen, is giving back to our community. So I was trying to figure out what this wonderful, magnificent building under construction could be. So the first thing that struck me, if it was Paul Allen, he's a software developer. So the first thing that struck me, it had to be the Seattle Science Center. It had to be the center of science because what else would have inspired Paul Allen but his love for science, for mathematics, for computer science, for physics? Well, they assured me it's not a Seattle Center for Science. So I said, my second guess, I said, well, obviously Paul Allen didn't want to be an academician like me. He wanted to make science real. He wanted to take his computer science, his mathematical training, and turn it into something that would change the world. So who would motivate him was somebody more like Thomas Edison or Henry Ford or Andrew Mellon or Carnegie or Rockefeller, the so-called robber barons, the people who created technology and turned it into wealth. They said, no, it's not a center for technology and it's not a center for enterprise. So those are my three guesses: a center for science, a center for technology, a center for enterprise. Well, I said, what could it be? And the people told me what it was. It was the Jimi Hendrix Experience Museum. And it took me a while to figure this out. You see, it wasn't a great scientist like Albert Einstein or a great technologist like Thomas Edison. It wasn't a great entrepreneur that inspired Paul Allen. In fact, he plays music in a band now that he's established. It was a young African-American boy, who grew up in Seattle, who changed the way guitar was played. In fact, the same man was my boyhood idol. Before I decided I was going to be an academic, it was my love for music. My love for the same person, Jimi Hendrix. It was an African-American poor child who didn't go to college, who learned to play guitar and changed the way we heard guitar, and banded together with two other guys and founded a little startup company, a band, and invested in a studio where he could make music. You never know where the creative spark's going to come from. And if people tell you it's a physicist that begets another physicist, it's a scientist that begets another scientist, it's technologist to technologist, that's all we have to do is build technology and enterprise, they're leading you down a wrong path. All of those things are important. But it's technology, talent, and tolerance. It's the ability to create an authentic community. Community that loves its heritage, that celebrates its heritage, that uses its heritage to reach out to the world, to not only attract the affection and emotional attachment of its insiders, but reach out to the world and attract and signal opportunity to the rest of the world. It's a community that celebrates diversity. The creative economy is filled with wonder. It's an incredibly evolving, a rapidly and fast-paced evolving. Obviously, you're so well positioned to succeed. I hope that my remarks have been helpful. I can tell you this from the bottom of my heart, from my very soul. I think we've established a great relationship to this city and this community. I hope to be back and to be able to work with you on this in the future. And congratulations and best of luck with your efforts.